Marcus Jones was a 16-year-old boy who lived with his mother in a small apartment on the east side of town. Every day after school, he would take the bus home, do his homework, and then help his mother with chores. His mother, Sarah, worked as a cleaner at 3 different houses to make ends meet. Life wasn't easy for them, but they had each other. On a warm Tuesday afternoon in May, Marcus finished his homework early. He decided to take a walk to the park instead of staying indoors. The park was about 15 minutes away from his apartment, and he enjoyed spending time there whenever he could. The park was beautiful that day. The trees were full of green leaves, birds were singing, and children were playing on the swings. Marcus sat on a bench near the pond and watched the ducks swim. He liked the peace and quiet of this spot. As Marcus sat there enjoying the view, he heard a loud splash followed by screams coming from the other side of the pond. He jumped up to see what was happening. About 50 feet away, a woman was struggling in the water. She was waving her arms frantically and calling for help. Without thinking twice, Marcus ran around the pond. He saw that the woman had fallen from a small bridge into the deepest part of the pond. He knew the pond was about 8 feet deep in that area. "Help! I can't swim," the woman cried, struggling to stay above water. Marcus quickly took off his shoes and jumped into the water. The cold water shocked his body, but he pushed forward. He was a good swimmer, having learned at the community pool when he was younger. When he reached the woman, she was panicking and trying to grab onto him. Marcus remembered what his swimming teacher had taught him about rescuing drowning people. "Ma'am, please try to calm down," he said firmly. "I'm here to help you. Please don't grab me. I'll help you get to shore." The woman was wearing expensive jewelry and a fancy dress that was now soaked and heavy. She tried to follow Marcus's instructions, but fear made it difficult. Marcus carefully positioned himself behind her and began to guide her toward the shore using a cross-chest carry. People had gathered around the pond, watching the rescue. Some were calling for help on their phones, while others stood in shock. "You're doing great," Marcus encouraged the woman as they moved slowly through the water. "We're almost there." When they finally reached the shallow part, 2 men rushed into the water to help them out. The woman was coughing and shaking but appeared to be okay. "Thank you," she said between coughs, looking at Marcus with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life." Marcus noticed that a tall man in an expensive suit was running toward them. "Elizabeth." The man called out, "Elizabeth." The man reached them and immediately embraced the woman. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I was taking pictures of the ducks from the bridge," Elizabeth explained, still shivering. "I leaned too far and fell in. This young man saved me, Richard." He jumped in without hesitation. Richard turned to Marcus, who was now dripping wet and cold. "You saved my wife's life," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Marcus shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same thing, sir." What Marcus didn't know was that Richard Wilson was one of the richest men in the city, a millionaire with businesses all over the country. And after today, Marcus's life would never be the same again. Richard Wilson helped his wife Elizabeth to a nearby bench. A small crowd had gathered around them, some taking pictures with their phones. Marcus stood awkwardly to the side, water dripping from his clothes and hair. "Young man, what's your name?" Richard asked, putting his expensive jacket around his wife's shoulders. "Marcus Jones, sir," Marcus replied, trying not to shiver. The May afternoon was warm, but the pond water had been cold. Richard took out his phone and made a quick call. "My driver will be here in 5 minutes with dry clothes and towels," he told Marcus. "Please, wait with us." A park worker arrived with a first aid kit and checked Elizabeth. She seemed to be fine, just shaken by the experience. Richard didn't leave her side, holding her hand and whispering comforting words. Marcus felt out of place among these wealthy people. He noticed Elizabeth's diamond necklace that probably cost more than his mother's yearly income. Richard's watch alone could pay their rent for months. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus," Richard said, trying to make conversation while they waited. "There's not much to tell, sir," Marcus said. "I live with my mom in the East Side apartments. I go to Jefferson High School." "What grade are you in?" Elizabeth asked, her voice stronger now. "I'm a junior, ma'am. I'll be a senior next year." "Do you have plans for college?" Richard asked. Marcus looked down at his wet shoes. "I hope to go if I can get a scholarship. My mom works really hard, but college is expensive." Before they could talk more, A black luxury car pulled up to the park entrance. A man in a uniform hurried toward them with a bag and towels. "Thank you, James," Richard said, taking the items. He handed towels and dry clothes to both Elizabeth and Marcus. "You can change in the park restrooms. James will take your wet clothes and have them cleaned and returned to you." Marcus hesitated. "That's very kind, but I should probably get home. My mom will be worried." "Of course," Richard nodded. "But please, at least take my card. I would like to thank you properly for what you did today." Richard handed Marcus a business card with gold lettering. It read, "Richard Wilson, CEO, Wilson Enterprises," with a phone number. "Call me tomorrow," Richard insisted. "And please, take this for a taxi home." He pulled out his wallet and offered Marcus some money. Marcus felt uncomfortable. "Sir, I don't need payment for helping someone." Elizabeth touched Marcus's arm gently. "It's not payment, dear. It's just so you can get home safely and dry. Please take it." Not wanting to be rude, Marcus accepted the money and a towel. He dried himself as best he could and promised to call Richard the next day. On the taxi ride home, Marcus looked at the business card. He had heard of Wilson Enterprises before. They owned many buildings downtown, including the shopping mall where his mother sometimes took him for special occasions. When Marcus arrived home, his mother was already there, preparing dinner. "Marcus, what happened? Why are you wet?" Sarah asked, alarmed at the sight of her son. Marcus told her the whole story about saving Elizabeth Wilson from the pond. Sarah listened with wide eyes, especially when Marcus mentioned Richard Wilson's name. "Marcus, do you know who Richard Wilson is?" she asked. "He's one of the richest men in the city. His company owns the buildings I clean." "He gave me his card and asked me to call him tomorrow," Marcus said, showing her the card. Sarah held the gold-lettered card carefully, as if it might break. "This could be a good opportunity, Marcus. Maybe he can help with your college funds or offer you a summer job." Neither Marcus nor his mother knew just how life-changing that afternoon would be. As Marcus went to shower and change into dry clothes, he had no idea that Richard Wilson was already making plans that would completely transform their lives. The next morning, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. He kept thinking about the events at the park and the business card that now sat on his desk. His mother had already left for her first cleaning job of the day, leaving a note reminding him to call Mr. Wilson. After breakfast, Marcus stared at the phone for several minutes before gathering the courage to dial the number on the card. His heart beat fast as he waited. "Wilson Enterprises, how may I direct your call?" a professional female voice answered. Hello, this is Marcus Jones. Mr. Wilson asked me to call him today," Marcus said nervously. "One moment, please, Mr. Jones." Marcus was surprised that he didn't have to explain who he was or why he was calling. After a brief pause, Richard Wilson's voice came through the phone. "Marcus, I'm glad you called. How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, sir. Thank you for asking. How is Mrs. Wilson?" "Elizabeth is doing well, thanks to you. She's resting at home today." Richard paused before continuing. "Marcus, I'd like to meet with you and your mother. Would that be possible today?" Marcus thought about his mother's schedule. "My mom finishes work at 3 o'clock, sir." "Perfect. Would it be all right if I send my driver to pick both of you up at 4 o'clock? We'd like to invite you to our home for dinner." Marcus was stunned. "Dinner at the Wilsons' home?" "I'll have to ask my mom, but I think that would be okay." "Excellent. What's your address? I'll have James pick you up." Marcus gave him their apartment address, still not believing this was happening. After hanging up, he immediately called his mother at work to tell her about the invitation. At exactly 4 o'clock, a shiny black car pulled up in front of their apartment building. Neighbors peeked through windows, curious about the luxury vehicle in their modest neighborhood. Marcus and his mother, Sarah, waited nervously by the entrance. Sarah had come home early to prepare for the meeting, wearing her best dress and fixing her hair carefully. "Do I look okay?" she asked Marcus for the 5th time. "You look great, Mom," Marcus assured her, adjusting his only tie. The driver, James, opened the car door for them with a polite smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Jones, it's a pleasure to meet you." "It's just Ms. Jones. I'm a single mother," Sarah explained with a shy smile. The car interior was unlike anything they had ever seen, with soft leather seats and a small refrigerator filled with drinks. The drive took about 30 minutes, taking them to the wealthiest part of the city. They finally arrived at a large iron gate that opened automatically, revealing a magnificent house that looked more like a palace. "This is where they live?" Sarah whispered to Marcus, amazed by the beautiful gardens and fountain in front of the house. James led them to the front door, which opened before they could knock. Elizabeth Wilson stood there with a warm smile, wearing a simple but elegant dress. "Welcome. I'm so happy to meet you properly, Ms. Jones. And Marcus, my hero, thank you for coming." Richard joined them in the enormous entrance hall, shaking hands with both Marcus and Sarah. "Please, come in. We have so much to talk about." They were led to a spacious living room with tall windows overlooking the garden. Everything in the room looked expensive but tasteful. Marcus noticed a grand piano in the corner and several beautiful paintings on the walls. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Elizabeth asked. As they settled into comfortable sofas, Marcus couldn't help but feel that something important was about to happen. The way Richard and Elizabeth exchanged looks told him they had something specific they wanted to discuss. "Before we have dinner," Richard began, "there's something Elizabeth and I would like to talk to you about. Something that we hope will change your lives for the better." Sarah reached for Marcus's hand, squeezing it nervously. Neither of them could imagine what was coming next. Richard Wilson sat forward in his chair, his expression serious yet kind. "After Marcus saved Elizabeth yesterday, we couldn't stop thinking about how different our lives might be today if he hadn't been there at that exact moment." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes growing teary. "I can't swim. The doctors said I would have drowned if Marcus hadn't acted so quickly." She reached out and touched Sarah's hand. "Your son is a hero." Sarah smiled proudly at Marcus. "He's always been a good boy. I've raised him to help others when they need it." Richard cleared his throat. "We did some research last night. We hope you don't mind, but we wanted to learn more about you both." Marcus and Sarah exchanged nervous glances. "We discovered that you work 3 cleaning jobs, Ms. Jones," Richard continued, "and that Marcus is an excellent student with a 3.8 GPA, despite having to work part-time at the grocery store on weekends." Sarah looked surprised. "How did you find all that out?" Richard smiled. "I have resources, but what struck us most was learning about Marcus's father." At the mention of his father, Marcus looked down at his hands. His father had been a firefighter who died saving a family from a burning building 5 years ago. The city had given him a Medal of Honor, but that didn't help with the bills or the empty space he left behind. "Your husband was a hero too," Elizabeth said softly. "Like father, like son." A housekeeper entered with a tray of drinks and small sandwiches, giving Marcus a moment to compose himself. After she left, Richard continued. "We want to help you both, not just as a thank you, but because we believe in supporting people who deserve it." He reached for a folder on the coffee table. "Elizabeth and I have set up a trust fund for Marcus's education. It will cover all expenses for any college he wishes to attend." Sarah gasped, her hand going to her mouth. "College? Any college?" "Yes, including Ivy League schools if that's what Marcus wants," Richard confirmed. "The fund also includes money for books, housing, food, and other expenses." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Just yesterday, he had been worried about how he would afford community college. Now, the Wilsons were offering him a chance to go anywhere. "That's not all," Elizabeth added. "Richard also wants to offer you a position at Wilson Enterprises, Ms. Jones." Richard nodded. "I need an office manager for our community outreach department. The salary is 3 times what you currently make, with full benefits and regular hours. No more cleaning 3 different houses each day." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say. This is so much." "There's one more thing," Richard said, pulling out another document. "We own several apartment buildings in the Riverside area. We'd like to offer you a 3-bedroom apartment at a very reduced rent. It's in a safe neighborhood with good schools, close to our main office." Marcus felt like he was dreaming. Just yesterday, they had been struggling to pay rent for their small 1-bedroom apartment. Now, the Wilsons were offering them a completely new life. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Marcus finally asked. Elizabeth reached out and took his hand. "Because you didn't hesitate to jump into that water. You didn't see a rich woman or consider what you might get in return. You just saw someone who needed help, and you acted." Richard nodded. People like you and your mother deserve opportunities. Your father gave his life helping others. Marcus nearly risked his to save my wife. This is not charity, it's investing in good people. Sarah wiped her tears, looking at her son with pride and joy. Thank you. We accept your generosity, and we promise to make the most of these opportunities. As they were led to the dining room for dinner, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he could see a future without constant struggle, a future full of possibilities. 1 month had passed since that evening at the Wilsons' mansion. Marcus and his mother Sarah had moved into their new apartment in Riverside. It was spacious and bright, with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a balcony overlooking a small park. Marcus still couldn't believe this was their home now. Sarah had started her new job at Wilson Enterprises. She no longer came home with tired feet and aching back from cleaning houses all day. Instead, she wore nice office clothes and managed a team of 5 people in the community outreach department. The regular hours meant she could have dinner with Marcus every evening, something that hadn't been possible for years. Marcus's life had changed too. He had transferred to Riverside High School, which had better teachers and more advanced classes. At first, he worried about fitting in with the wealthy students, but his natural friendliness had helped him make new friends quickly. This morning, Marcus was getting ready for a special event. Richard Wilson had invited him to spend the day at Wilson Enterprises for what he called future career exploration. Marcus put on the new clothes his mother had bought him, nice pants, a button-up shirt, and a tie. "You look so handsome," Sarah said, adjusting his tie. "Just like your father when he dressed up." Marcus smiled at the comparison. His father's photo still held a special place in their new living room. "Mr. Wilson said his driver will pick me up at 9, Marcus said, checking his watch. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked. "A little," Marcus admitted. "I don't know what to expect." "Just be yourself. That's who they admire," Sarah reminded him. When the doorbell rang, Marcus was surprised to find Richard Wilson himself standing there instead of the driver. "Good morning, Marcus," Richard greeted him with a smile. "Ready for your first day at Wilson Enterprises?" Marcus nodded, saying goodbye to his mother before following Richard to his car. Instead of the usual black car with a driver, Richard was driving himself in a sporty red convertible. "I thought I'd drive today," Richard explained. "It gives us time to talk." As they drove through the city, Richard asked Marcus about school and how he was settling into his new life. Marcus shared his experiences openly, feeling comfortable with the older man who had shown such generosity. "My teachers say I should start preparing for college applications," Marcus mentioned. "They think I have a good chance at some top schools." "They're right," Richard agreed. "Have you thought about what you might want to study?" "I'm thinking about engineering or maybe business," Marcus replied. "I like solving problems and building things." Richard smiled. "That's excellent. Both fields would suit you well." They arrived at a tall glass building in the center of the city with Wilson Enterprises in large letters at the top. Richard led Marcus through the busy lobby, where everyone greeted them respectfully. They took a private elevator to the top floor. "This is my office," Richard said as they entered a large room with windows on 3 sides, offering a breathtaking view of the city. A woman was waiting for them, arranging papers on a conference table. Marcus recognized her as Elizabeth Wilson. "Marcus," she greeted him warmly. "It's wonderful to see you again." "Mrs. Wilson, I didn't expect to see you here," Marcus said, surprised. "I'm much more involved in the business than people realize," she explained with a smile. "Today is special. We've invited some people we'd like you to meet." Richard guided Marcus to the conference table just as several people entered the room. They were introduced as the heads of different departments at Wilson Enterprises: engineering, marketing, finance, and community projects. "These are some of the brightest minds in our company," Richard explained. "Today, they'll share what they do and answer any questions you have. Think of it as a personal career fair." Marcus looked around the table in amazement. These important people had taken time out of their busy day just for him. "But why are you doing all this for me?" Marcus asked, still not fully understanding. Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Because potential like yours should be nurtured. What you did for me showed character. Now, we want to show you possibilities for your future." By the time summer arrived, Marcus had completed his junior year at Riverside High School with straight A's. His new school offered advanced classes that challenged him in ways his old school never could. The career day at Wilson Enterprises had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never imagined. On a warm Saturday morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table filling out applications for summer internship programs. Richard had encouraged him to apply to several prestigious companies, including Wilson Enterprises. His mother entered the room with 2 cups of coffee. "Still working on those applications?" Sarah asked, placing 1 cup beside him. "Yes. Mr. Wilson says even though he could give me an internship directly, it's better if I go through the normal application process. He says it will teach me valuable skills." Sarah nodded, proud of how maturely her son was handling his new opportunities. "He's right. Nothing worth having comes too easily." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find Elizabeth Wilson standing there with a small gift bag. "Elizabeth." What a surprise, Sarah greeted her. Over the past months, the 2 women had developed a genuine friendship despite their different backgrounds. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Elizabeth said as she entered. "I wanted to drop this off for Marcus." Marcus stood up to greet her. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson." Elizabeth handed him the gift bag. "This is something special for you. Go ahead, open it." Inside the bag, Marcus found a small box. When he opened it, he discovered a beautiful silver watch. "This is too much," he said, staring at the expensive gift. Elizabeth shook her head. "It's not just any watch. Turn it over." Marcus flipped the watch over and saw an engraving on the back, "To Marcus Jones. Your bravery saved my life. Time is precious. Use yours wisely." "I know it's been a few months since the incident at the park," Elizabeth explained, "but I wanted to give you something meaningful that you could keep for years to come." Marcus was speechless. He carefully put the watch on his wrist, admiring how it looked. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'll treasure it." Elizabeth smiled, then turned to Sarah. "I also came to invite both of you to a special event next weekend. Richard and I are hosting a charity gala for the Children's Hospital, and we'd be honored if you would attend as our special guests." Sarah looked uncertain. "A charity gala? I've never been to anything like that." "Don't worry," Elizabeth assured her. "It's just dinner, dancing, and raising money for a good cause. Many of our friends have been asking to meet Marcus after hearing his story." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "People know about me?" Elizabeth nodded. "Your story has inspired many of our friends. In fact, Richard mentioned your rescue at a business meeting, and now several of his associates want to contribute to the scholarship fund we set up for you." "More people want to help with my college?" Marcus asked in disbelief. "Yes, and not just yours. Richard and I were so moved by your situation that we decided to establish a larger scholarship foundation for promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. We're calling it the Marcus Jones Scholarship Fund." Sarah gasped. "You're naming it after Marcus?" Elizabeth nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "The foundation will help dozens of students each year. We wanted to announce it officially at the gala, with Marcus there as the inspiration behind it all." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Not only had his life changed dramatically, but now his name would be attached to a scholarship that would help other kids like him. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. Elizabeth took his hand. "You don't need to say anything. Just keep being the wonderful young man you are. Your brave act didn't just save my life. It's now going to change many lives for years to come." As Elizabeth discussed the details of the gala with his mother, Marcus looked down at his new watch. The second hand moved steadily around the face, marking time in a life that had transformed completely in just a few short months. The night of the charity gala arrived. Marcus stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the bow tie of his new tuxedo. Richard had sent a personal tailor to their apartment last week to ensure Marcus would have a perfectly fitted suit for the event. The young man in the mirror looked almost like a stranger, confident, polished, and mature. A knock came at his door. "Marcus? Are you ready?" his mother called. When Marcus opened the door, he was stunned by his mother's transformation. Sarah wore a long blue evening gown that made her look like a movie star. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a simple pearl necklace that Elizabeth had lent her for the occasion. "Mom, you look amazing," Marcus exclaimed. Sarah smiled shyly. "You think so? This dress is fancier than anything I've ever worn." "You're the most beautiful woman in the world," Marcus assured her. The doorbell rang, their ride had arrived. But instead of Richard's driver, they found both Richard and Elizabeth at their door, dressed in formal attire. We thought we should all arrive together, Richard explained with a warm smile. The four of them rode in Richard's luxury car to the Grand Plaza Hotel, the most expensive hotel in the city. As they approached, Marcus saw photographers and well-dressed people entering the building. Are those reporters? Marcus asked nervously. Just local society photographers, Elizabeth explained. Don't worry, they're mainly interested in the regular donors. But when they stepped out of the car, several photographers turned their cameras toward them. Richard waved politely while guiding the group inside. Marcus heard whispers as they walked through the lobby. That's the boy who saved Elizabeth Wilson. I heard the Wilsons set up a scholarship in his name. His father was a firefighter who died saving people. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Round tables covered with white cloths filled the space, each decorated with beautiful flower arrangements. A small orchestra played soft music in the corner. Richard led them to the main table at the front of the room. Marcus noticed name cards showing they would be sitting with the mayor and other important people. I don't belong here, Marcus whispered to his mother. Yes, you do, Sarah replied firmly. Hold your head high. Throughout dinner, Marcus was introduced to doctors, business owners, and city officials. Everyone treated him with respect, asking about his studies and future plans. Despite his initial nervousness, Marcus found himself enjoying the conversations. After the meal, Richard stood and approached the podium. The room fell silent. Thank you all for coming tonight to support the Children's Hospital, Richard began. Before we start the fundraising portion of our evening, I want to share a story about why my wife and I have been inspired to expand our charitable work this year. Richard motioned for Marcus to join him. With a gentle push from his mother, Marcus walked to the podium. This is Marcus Jones, Richard continued. 6 months ago, Elizabeth was taking photographs at Westside Park when she accidentally fell into the pond. She was in real danger of drowning when Marcus, without hesitation, jumped in and saved her life. Applause filled the room. Marcus felt his face grow warm. What makes this story special isn't just Marcus's brave action that day. It's what we discovered afterward. Marcus is an exceptional student who was working weekends to help his single mother make ends meet. His father, a firefighter, lost his life saving a family from a burning building 5 years ago. The room grew quiet, hanging on Richard's every word. My wife and I realized that there are many young people like Marcus in our city, bright, hardworking individuals who just need an opportunity to reach their full potential. That's why we've established the Marcus Jones Scholarship Foundation, which will provide full college scholarships to deserving students from underprivileged backgrounds. More applause erupted, louder this time. Several people stood up, creating a standing ovation. Tonight, Richard continued when the room quieted again, I'm proud to announce that several of you have already committed to supporting this foundation. We've raised over $2 million before the gala even began. Marcus couldn't believe his ears. $2 million for a scholarship named after him? It seemed impossible. And now, Richard said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder, I'd like Marcus to say a few words. Marcus hadn't prepared a speech. As he looked out at the sea of wealthy, influential faces, he took a deep breath and spoke from his heart. Marcus stood at the podium, his heart beating fast in his chest. The bright lights of the ballroom shined on him as hundreds of wealthy, important people waited for him to speak. He took a deep breath and began. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Jones. 6 months ago, I was just a regular kid from the east side of town. I jumped into a pond to help someone who was drowning. I didn't know she was Mrs. Wilson. I didn't know her husband was a millionaire. I just saw someone who needed help. His voice grew stronger as he continued. What happened after that day changed my life forever. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson didn't just thank me and move on. They looked at my life and my mother's life and decided to help us in ways we never imagined possible. Marcus looked over at his mother, who watched him with tears in her eyes. My mom doesn't have to clean houses anymore. I go to a good school now. We live in a safe neighborhood. And most importantly, I can go to college without worrying about money. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But the most amazing thing is happening tonight. The scholarship with my name will help other kids like me, Kids who work hard but don't have many opportunities. Kids who dream of college but worry about how to pay for it. Marcus looked directly at Richard and Elizabeth Wilson, who sat at the main table smiling proudly at him. What I learned from Mr. and Mrs. Wilson is that when you have the power to help others, you should. They could have just given me a reward and forgotten about me. Instead, they changed my life, and now they're changing the lives of many other students. That's true generosity. The room was completely silent, every person focused on his words. I promise to make the most of the opportunities I've been given, and someday I hope to help others the way the Wilsons have helped me. Thank you. The audience rose to their feet, applauding loudly. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Marcus returned to his seat, where his mother hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. The rest of the evening was a blur of handshakes and conversations. Many guests approached Marcus to congratulate him and offer business cards, mentioning internships and future job opportunities. By the end of the night, the gala had raised another $1 million for both the Children's Hospital and the Marcus Jones Scholarship Foundation. As they rode home in Richard's car, everyone was quiet, tired but happy from the successful evening. "Marcus," Richard said, breaking the silence, "there's one more thing we haven't told you." Marcus looked up curiously. "Elizabeth and I would like to offer you an official position at Wilson Enterprises next summer. It would be a paid internship in whatever department interests you most. It could continue each summer until you finish college, if you like it." "Really?" Marcus couldn't hide his excitement. "Yes," Elizabeth added. "And we've spoken with the principal at your school. They're willing to give you academic credit for it." Sarah reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "See what opportunities come when you do the right thing without expecting anything in return." When they arrived at the apartment, Richard and Elizabeth walked them to the door. "Thank you both for everything," Marcus said. "Not just for me and my mom, but for all the students who will benefit from the Scholarship Foundation." Elizabeth hugged him. "You're the one who deserves thanks, Marcus. You showed us that a single act of courage can start something much bigger than ourselves." After saying good night, Marcus and his mother went inside. Sarah made tea while Marcus changed out of his tuxedo. "Can you believe all of this happened because I happened to be at the park that day?" Marcus asked, sitting at the kitchen table. Sarah shook her head, smiling. "It wasn't just being at the park. It was your character, your willingness to help someone in trouble without thinking about what you might get in return." She placed a hand on his cheek. "Your father would be so proud of the young man you've become." Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of happiness and purpose. One simple act had changed everything, not just his life, but the lives of many others for years to come. As he looked out the window at the city lights, Marcus knew that his future, once limited by circumstances, was now full of endless possibilities.